were walking to our cars. She had hers and I had mine. And then she said, Mom, I don't think I don't feel good. My stomach hurts. And I go, oh. She goes, I think I'm going to go home.
It began with a voice that Priscilla Presley would never hear again. Mom, I don't feel good. My stomach hurts. I think I'm going to go home. That was the last thing Lisa Marie Presley ever said to her mother. For years, Priscilla had replayed that moment like a broken record stuck on the same sentence, the same tone, the same fragile tremor in Lisa's voice that she hadn't recognized for what it was, a warning. A quiet, almost invisible signal that something deep inside her daughter was shutting down. But that night, it sounded so ordinary. Just a mother and daughter wrapping up another event, another public appearance, another night of pretending that the weight of their last name didn't crush them both in private. Priscilla had seen Lisa looking pale that evening. The Golden Globes had just wrapped up and the cameras had been relentless, flash after flash, people shouting their names. Lisa had smiled through it, even stood beside her mother for photos, but Priscilla could tell something was off. She kept brushing her hand across her stomach, like a small motion could erase whatever pain she was feeling. When Lisa leaned in and whispered that she wasn't feeling well, Priscilla thought it was exhaustion. Maybe the heat, maybe the nerves. Lisa had been through worse. She'd always pushed through everything, heartbreak, grief, the unending comparisons to her father. So when she said, I think I'm going to go home, Priscilla nodded. Okay, sweetheart, get some rest. Call me when you're home. Those were Priscilla's last words to her only child. At the time, they sounded calm, loving, enough. But hours later, when the phone rang again, that same phrase became the line that haunted her because she hadn't said enough. She hadn't said, are you sure? She hadn't said, do you want me to come with you? She hadn't said, don't go alone. And when the call came from the hospital, Priscilla would have given anything to go back and hold Lisa's face in her hands just one more time. That night was supposed to be celebratory. Elvis's name had been mentioned on stage, and both mother and daughter had stood together, representing not just a legacy, but a family that had endured everything: loss, scandal, survival. Lisa had smiled for the cameras, though her eyes seemed heavier than usual. She, spoken softly about how proud her father would have been. It was the kind of night that meant more to the world than to either of them. Because for Priscilla and Lisa, public appearances were never just about showing up. They were about holding up the Presley name, the illusion of strength, the myth of a family that had already buried too many ghosts. By the time Priscilla returned home that night, her phone was already buzzing. Messages from reporters, photos flooding the internet. She poured herself a glass of water, kicked off her heels, and smiled faintly at a picture of Lisa on the kitchen counter. Her daughter, radiant, brave, smiling through pain. But underneath that picture was another photo, an old one of Elvis holding Lisa when she was just a baby, her small hands tangled in his hair, her face pressed against his cheek. Priscilla had kept that picture there for decades. It reminded her of a time before the world interfered, before the cameras and contracts and gossip columns turned their love story into an empire. That night she looked at the photo and whispered, "You'd be proud of her, Elvis." She didn't know, as she said it, that in just a few hours she'd be whispering the same words through tears beside a hospital bed. When the call came in, it was short and clinical, a voice on the other end, trembling but trying to stay composed. "Mrs. Presley, this is West Hills Hospital. We have your daughter here. You need to come immediately." For a few seconds, she didn't understand. She thought it was a mistake, maybe an allergic reaction, maybe dehydration. The Golden Globes had been stressful, Lisa had been nervous. But then the words cardiac arrest cut through everything else. The drive to the hospital was a blur. She couldn't tell you how many red lights she passed or how many times she prayed under her breath. The only thing she remembers clearly is the sound of Lisa's voice playing over and over in her mind. "Mom, I don't feel good." It wasn't just a sentence anymore, it was a siren. When Priscilla arrived, the hallway smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic. Nurses moved quickly, their shoes whispering across the floor. A doctor met her halfway and said something she didn't hear, something about doing everything we can. That phrase, everything we can, is what doctors say when everything is already gone. Priscilla sat in the waiting room, staring at her hands. The same hands that had once held Lisa's tiny fingers in Graceland's nursery. The same hands that had helped her daughter fix her hair before her first school dance. The same hands that now trembled uncontrollably, empty, useless. Time folded, Minutes felt like hours. Every sound, every footstep, every phone ring made her heart leap and then sink again. Finally, someone approached, a young nurse, eyes wet, voice soft. "Mrs. Presley, I'm so sorry." And just like that, the world that had already taken Elvis from her took Lisa too. For years, Priscilla had wondered how a human heart could survive breaking twice. That night, she learned that it doesn't. It just keeps beating because it doesn't know how to stop. In the days that followed, the house grew impossibly quiet. Graceland had always felt haunted, but this was different. Now it wasn't just memories, it was echoes. Priscilla could hear Lisa's laughter in the kitchen, the sound of her footsteps coming down the hallway, her voice calling, "Mom, where are you?" But the silence always answered. She replayed every conversation they'd had that week. Lisa had been restless, distracted, talking more about her father than usual. She said, "I feel him more lately, like he's close." Priscilla had smiled at that, thinking it was comforting. Now it felt like a premonition. Grief does strange things to memory. It edits moments, rewrites them, makes you see signs where none existed before. Priscilla found herself re-examining that last conversation, the tone of Lisa's voice, the pause before she said, "I don't feel good." Was there fear there? Did she know something was wrong? Did she hesitate, hoping her mother would insist on staying with her? Every time Priscilla tried to sleep, she saw Lisa's face. Not the glamorous, photographed version the world saw, but the little girl sitting cross-legged on the floor of Graceland, playing with dolls, asking endless questions about her daddy. What was his favorite song, Mom? What did he smell like? Did he really sing to you? And always, always, Priscilla would answer with a soft smile and say, "Yes, baby. He sang to both of us." Now she couldn't stop wondering if Lisa had gone to him. Reporters flooded the gates of Graceland within hours. Statements, condolences, tributes. Every network wanted Priscilla to speak. But what could she say? How do you summarize losing your daughter and your husband to the same kind of quiet death, a heart too heavy to keep beating? She didn't speak for days. Not because she was being private, but because there were no words left that could survive what she felt. When she finally did speak, it wasn't to the cameras. It was to a framed photograph of Lisa and Elvis that sat by her bed. "She's with you now," she whispered. "Please take care of her." But beneath that prayer was something darker, a question she didn't dare say aloud. Had she taken care of Lisa enough while she was here? Because the truth, the part no one likes to say out loud, is that Priscilla and Lisa's relationship hadn't always been easy. Love doesn't erase hurt, and time doesn't always heal it. They had fought, grown apart, then found their way back again, over and over, like two people trying to rebuild a bridge that kept collapsing under the weight of history. Elvis's shadow had always been between them, not as a man, but as a myth. Lisa had inherited his voice, his face, his demons, and Priscilla had inherited the impossible task of protecting a daughter from a legacy that even she couldn't control. They were both survivors of the same story, but in different ways. Lisa had tried to outrun it with music, with rebellion, with love. Priscilla had tried to preserve it, polish it, make sense of it. And in the end, both women were still haunted by the same name, Presley. That night, sitting alone after the funeral, Priscilla stared at the last text message Lisa had sent her. "Love you, Mom." Two words that meant everything and nothing. Because love in their family had always been complicated, fierce, consuming, and sometimes too heavy to carry. She thought of all the times she'd watched Lisa perform, the tremor in her voice when she sang about loss, about ghosts, about trying to find peace in a world that never stopped watching her. Priscilla used to sit in the back of the room, hands clasped, smiling through tears, because every lyric sounded like a message to the father Lisa never stopped missing. Now she realized those songs were messages to her too. For years, Priscilla had been the strong one, the keeper of the legacy, the gatekeeper of Graceland. But now, in her quiet home, surrounded by photos of everyone she'd ever loved and lost, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in decades: emptiness. She found herself whispering into the dark, as if Lisa could still hear her. "I should have made you stay, I should have known." And sometimes, late at night, when the world was asleep and the house creaked with old memories, Priscilla imagined hearing Lisa's voice again, soft, tired, filled with love. "Mom, I don't feel good." Only this time, she imagined herself saying something different, something she never said when she still had the chance. "Then I'm coming with you, baby. You're not going anywhere alone." That thought would break her heart all over again, and somehow it was the only thing that kept her alive. Because deep down, she believed Lisa wasn't really gone. She was back where she had always belonged between her parents, in the space where love and pain had always lived side by side. And even though Priscilla would spend the rest of her life wishing for one more conversation, she took comfort in one fragile truth, that Lisa's final words were simple, human, and full of trust. "Mom, I don't feel good. I think I'm going to go home." Maybe she didn't mean her house. Maybe she meant home. And maybe, just maybe, she got there. Grief doesn't announce itself. It just moves in quietly, rearranges the furniture in your heart, and never leaves. For Priscilla Presley, silence became both a punishment and a refuge. The day Lisa Marie died, the world expected her to speak, to comfort, to explain, to make sense of the senseless. But what could she possibly say? Every word felt like a betrayal of her daughter's privacy. Every silence felt like a betrayal of her memory. In the days that followed, Priscilla didn't answer calls. She didn't open her curtains. The world outside was already writing its own story, headlines about the Presley curse, about another life lost too young, about destiny repeating itself. But Priscilla knew it wasn't destiny. It was something quieter, sadder, and infinitely more human, a heart that had carried too much pain for too long. She'd seen it in Lisa's eyes for years, that same distant sorrow that used to live behind Elvis's smile. The kind that no fame, no love, no amount of success could ever touch. It wasn't depression exactly, it was weight. The weight of being born into a story that began long before you could even speak. Lisa had spent her life trying to prove she wasn't just her father's daughter. But how could she not be? Every time she walked into a room, someone saw him. Every time she sang, people compared her tone, her movements, her sadness. And Priscilla, standing on the sidelines, had watched her fight a ghost she could never defeat. Sometimes, late at night, they'd talk about it. Lisa would pour herself a glass of wine and sit across from her mother, legs tucked under her like a child again. "I just want to be me," she'd say. "Not a Presley, not a legacy, just me." And Priscilla would smile gently because she understood. She lived her entire life as his wife, even decades after the divorce, even after his death. She'd been defined by Elvis long after she stopped belonging to him. And now her daughter was trapped in the same endless orbit, different generation, same gravitational pull. They were both satellites around a man who was no longer there. But mother and daughter love isn't simple. It's not built on logic or peace. It's built on survival, and sometimes survival means holding your tongue. Priscilla had spent years keeping certain truths locked away about Elvis's decline, about his anger, about her own mistakes. She believed she was protecting Lisa by keeping those doors closed. But over time, that silence built walls between them. Lisa would ask questions about her father, about those final months, and Priscilla would change the subject. "He loved you more than anything," she'd say, smiling tightly. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was darker, heavier, and shaped the way Lisa saw the world. She grew up worshiping a man who died before she truly knew him, and resenting a mother who seemed to keep him hidden behind glass. Once, during a quiet afternoon in Graceland, Lisa told her mother, "You always make it sound prettier than it was." Priscilla had looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean you talk about him like a saint. But I've seen the files, the reports, the interviews. I know what people said. Why don't you ever tell me the truth?" Priscilla's voice had trembled when she answered, "Because, baby, you don't need to carry that." But Lisa had been carrying it anyway, all of it. The pressure, the contradictions, the pain of being a living reminder of everything Elvis was and everything he was. And that's what haunted Priscilla most after Lisa's death, the realization that her silence hadn't protected her daughter. It had isolated her. When reporters cornered Priscilla outside the memorial service, asking what her last words to Lisa had been, she couldn't answer. How could she tell them the truth? That her final exchange with her daughter wasn't poetic or cinematic or comforting. It was mundane. A few soft words between two women who loved each other but didn't always know how to say it. People wanted meaning, they wanted closure, but grief rarely offers either. In the weeks after the funeral, Priscilla began sorting through Lisa's belongings. Letters, notes, recordings, fragments of a life that now felt impossibly unfinished. Every object carried a pulse. A half-read book with the corner folded down, a jacket that still smelled faintly of perfume, a voice memo titled Dad. When she pressed play, Priscilla heard Lisa's voice, small and cracking. Sometimes I feel like I'm fatting, like the parts of me that were his are taking over the parts that are mine. Priscilla stopped it halfway through. She couldn't bear to hear the rest. That was when the guilt began to consume her, not for what she had said, but for what she hadn't. There had been so many moments when Lisa had reached out, and Priscilla, believing she was giving her space, had stepped back. Text messages unanswered. Missed calls returned too late. Invitations politely declined because we'll talk next week. Now there were no more next weeks. In her interviews after the funeral, Priscilla looked composed, even graceful. She thanked the fans. She asked for privacy. But behind that calm exterior, she was crumbling. Because the world saw her as the dignified matriarch of a legacy, when in truth, she was just a mother who had outlived her child. Every night she would walk past Lisa's photos and whisper an apology, not for the arguments, not for the distance, but for surviving her. And yet buried beneath all the pain, there was something else, pride. Because Priscilla knew Lisa had lived with extraordinary courage. She had faced addiction, heartbreak, and loss under a spotlight that magnified every flaw, every stumble. She had raised her children with the same fierce love that Elvis once showed her. And in her final years, Lisa had finally begun to forgive herself for being human. Priscilla could see that now, in hindsight. The way Lisa had talked about her father less with anger and more with acceptance. The way she had started showing up to family dinners again. The way her voice softened when she spoke about her kids. There had been healing in progress, quiet, fragile, almost invisible, and then it was gone. After the funeral, someone handed Priscilla a sealed envelope. "We found this in her home," they said gently. Inside was a handwritten list, not a letter, not a goodbye, just a list titled "Things I Want to Make Right This Year." The first line read, "Talk more with Mom." Priscilla stared at those words for hours. They were simple, almost childlike, but they carried the weight of an entire lifetime of misunderstandings. She folded the list carefully and kept it in her purse, where it still sits today, a constant reminder that love doesn't always need to be perfect to be real. The world wanted statements, interviews, closure, but Priscilla chose silence, not because she didn't care, but because speaking meant reliving it, and because, deep down, she believed Lisa's story didn't belong to anyone else. But silence is its own language. It speaks through the eyes, through gestures, through the way someone touches an old photograph. When Priscilla finally appeared at a public event months later, she didn't mention her daughter by name. She simply said, "We're stronger when we remember with love." That was all she could manage, and maybe that was enough. Still, in the privacy of her home, Priscilla kept returning to one haunting thought. What if her silence had taught Lisa to hide her own pain too? Because Lisa had been a mirror, the same grace under fire, the same instinct to protect others by pretending she was fine, the same habit of carrying her sadness quietly like a secret. Maybe that was the Presley curse, not tragedy, not addiction, not fame, but silence. The kind that keeps generations from saying what needs to be said until it's too late. Priscilla began journaling in those quiet months, filling pages with letters to Lisa that would never be sent. She wrote about the time Lisa fell off her bike at Graceland and refused to cry because she wanted to be tough like Daddy. She wrote about their arguments, their laughter, the night Lisa called her crying after her first heartbreak. But most of all, she wrote about forgiveness, not for Lisa but for herself. Because deep down, she knew grief isn't about answers. It's about learning to live with questions that will never be resolved. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and walk through the halls of Graceland. The air there always felt alive, as if memories had weight. And in those quiet moments, she'd whisper, "I love you, baby. I hope you knew that." And maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of pain and time, Lisa heard her. Priscilla's silence was heavy, yes, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with love too vast to fit into words. It was the kind of silence that mothers keep when the world doesn't deserve to hear their grief. The world saw a composed woman, standing straight under flashbulbs, thanking fans for their prayers. What they didn't see was the mother who sat awake every night, replaying a simple phone call that had become a lifetime's worth of regret. "Mom, I don't feel good." Those words would echo forever. But with time, Priscilla began to hear something else hidden inside them, not pain, not fear, but trust. Lisa had called her mother because even after everything, the fights, the distance, the fame, she still believed her mother was the safest person to turn to. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. Because in the end, love isn't about how perfectly we live together, it's about who we call when we're hurting. And Lisa's last call had been to her. That was the truth Priscilla finally chose to hold on to. Not the headlines, not the silence, but the simple, unspoken bond that outlived everything else. Still, there was one more wound left to reopen, a discovery Priscilla hadn't yet made. One night, while going through a drawer in Lisa's home, she found something tucked beneath an old photograph. A small folded paper, almost hidden away, with a line written in Lisa's handwriting. It read, "If anything ever happens to me, tell Mom I understand now." Priscilla sat there frozen, her tears falling onto the paper. She didn't know what Lisa meant. Understand what? The past, the pain, the choices, maybe all of it. That note would change everything. Because for the first time, Priscilla realized her daughter hadn't left this world in bitterness or confusion. She left it with understanding. And for a mother who'd spent a lifetime haunted by silence, that single line felt like a whispered reply from beyond. But Priscilla wasn't ready to share it with the world, not yet. Some truths are too sacred to belong to anyone else. And so she folded the note back carefully, placed it in her journal, and whispered into the dark once more. "Thank you, baby. I understand now, too." But the story wasn't over, not yet. Because what Priscilla found next, just days later, would reopen every wound she thought had finally begun to heal. It was a quiet afternoon when Priscilla found it. The world had moved on, as it always does, but inside Lisa's house, time had stopped. Everything looked the same as the day she left it. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the counter. A coat draped over the chair. A candle burned halfway down, frozen mid-life like everything else. Priscilla had come to pack away some of Lisa's personal things, or at least that's what she told herself. But the truth was simpler, sadder. She came because she didn't know what else to do. The days after the funeral had blurred together into one long ache. Reporters had moved to other headlines. The fans had sent their flowers. But grief, real grief, doesn't end when the cameras do. It lingers, silent and patient, in the smallest corners. A smell, a sound, a photograph you can't bring yourself to turn face down. She moved slowly through the house, touching everything like it might disappear if she didn't. Lisa's handwriting was everywhere, on notes, on mail, on lists scribbled in the margins of books. It made her feel close to her again. But when she opened the top drawer of Lisa's nightstand, she found something different, something that didn't feel like it wanted to be found. It was a folded piece of paper, tucked between a rosary and a photo of Elvis holding a baby Lisa. The paper had been folded and refolded so many times that the creases had nearly torn through it. Priscilla hesitated before opening it. Her hands trembled. On the first line, in Lisa's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that stopped her breath. "I forgive you, Mom." The rest of the page was only half filled, sentences that began and broke off, thoughts left midstream. It wasn't a letter, not really. More like something Lisa had started to write to herself, or maybe to someone she hoped to forgive someday. "We all break in different ways. You had to be strong when I couldn't. You kept secrets I didn't understand. But I see it now. I know you loved him, even when it hurt us." Priscilla's heart tightened. She sat there, reading the same lines over and over until the words blurred. The note wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was raw, like someone had ripped open their soul and didn't know how to close it again. For the first time since Lisa's death, Priscilla cried without stopping herself. Not the quiet, careful tears she shed for cameras, but the kind that come from years of things unsaid. Because in those unfinished sentences, she heard every argument, every silence, every time Lisa had walked away mid-conversation, because neither of them knew how to speak without hurting the other. "I forgive you, Mom." It was just 4 words, but they carried a lifetime. Forgive her for what? For keeping Elvis's darkness hidden, for being the one who survived him, for trying to protect Lisa by pretending the world wasn't cruel, maybe for all of it. Priscilla thought back to the last time she and Lisa had spoken honestly, really honestly. It had been months before the Golden Globes. They were sitting outside, the evening soft and still. Lisa had been restless that night, talking about how she felt like she was living between 2 worlds. "Sometimes I don't know who I'm supposed to be," she said quietly. "Your daughter, his daughter, or just me?" Priscilla had reached across the table and said, "You can be all of them." Lisa had smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said softly, "but sometimes being all of them means being none of them." That conversation had haunted Priscilla ever since. She had wanted to tell Lisa that she understood that she too had spent a lifetime balancing between love and legacy. But she hadn't. The words had caught in her throat, swallowed by pride and exhaustion. Now, reading that note, she realized Lisa had understood anyway. The rest of the paper was filled with fragments, half-thoughts, little glimpses of a woman trying to make peace with herself. I keep dreaming of Dad. He's not young anymore in the dreams. He looks like how he did at the end, tired but peaceful. I think he forgave us both. Priscilla's fingers froze on that line. She whispered it aloud, he forgave us both. Those 5 words cut deeper than anything she'd read before. Because forgiveness was something Priscilla had never given herself. Not for leaving Elvis when he needed her. Not for letting Lisa grow up surrounded by ghosts. Not for being the one who lived to tell their stories when both of them were gone. For years, she had carried that guilt like armor. She wore grace like a shield because that's what the world expected, the dignified widow, the careful mother, the quiet keeper of a legend. But inside, she had been drowning. And now, in Lisa's unfinished note, there was a lifeline she never expected, a daughter who had finally seen through the myths, through the silence, and found the truth her mother had been too afraid to speak. Priscilla held the note to her chest and whispered, "I forgive you too." It was the first time she'd said those words out loud. In the days that followed, she couldn't stop reading the note. She carried it with her everywhere, tucked in her journal, folded in her purse, resting beside her bed at night. Sometimes she'd unfold it just to touch Lisa's handwriting, as if the ink itself still carried warmth. But as comforting as it was, the note also opened new wounds, because it reminded her of everything they never got to say, the apologies that never crossed their lips, the conversations that ended in tears instead of understanding. She remembered one night years earlier when Lisa had called her in anger. "Why do you always protect everyone but me?" she'd said. "You protected Dad, you protected the truth, but who protected me?" Priscilla had been silent then, because she didn't have an answer. She had thought she was protecting Lisa by keeping certain stories buried, by preserving the image of Elvis that the world loved. But in doing so, she had built a wall between them, one that neither of them could fully climb over. Now she understood what Lisa had meant. The note wasn't just forgiveness, it was a bridge. A fragile, handwritten bridge between the mother who couldn't speak her truth and the daughter who had spent her life searching for it. A few days later, Priscilla made a decision that startled even her closest friends. She agreed to do an interview, not the kind of publicity-driven talk she'd done 1,000 times before. This would be different, personal, vulnerable, honest. For the first time, she wanted to speak not as Elvis's ex-wife or as the guardian of his estate, but as Lisa's mother. When the interviewer asked why she'd chosen to speak now, Priscilla hesitated before answering. "Because she wanted me to," she said simply. "She told me in her own way." She didn't mention the note. That part she kept for herself. Some truths aren't meant for the world, they're meant for the heart. But when the conversation turned to Lisa's final days, Priscilla's voice softened. "She wasn't just my daughter," she said. "She was my teacher. Everything I know about forgiveness, I learned from her even after she was gone." The interviewer paused, clearly moved. "What do you mean by that?" Priscilla looked down for a long moment before answering. "I spent most of my life trying to protect people from pain, Elvis, Lisa, even the fans. But pain doesn't disappear when you hide it. It grows. And my daughter, she finally showed me that truth. Her whole life she wanted honesty. She just wanted to be seen." She stopped there, unable to continue. Later that night, after the interview aired, thousands of messages poured in, from mothers who had lost children, from daughters who wished they'd said more, from strangers who simply wrote, "We heard you." Priscilla read each one quietly. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her grief. Still, the note stayed locked away. She wasn't ready to share it, because it wasn't a headline or a quote. It was a conversation between two souls, separated by time but bound by love. She often wondered when Lisa had written it. The paper looked old, the ink slightly faded. Maybe it was recent. Maybe it was from years ago after one of their arguments. Or maybe Lisa had written it long before she ever meant to send it, a rehearsal for forgiveness she hadn't yet found. Whatever the truth, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she wrote it. That somewhere in her final years, Lisa had found peace with her mother, even if she never got the chance to say it aloud. And that realization changed something in Priscilla. The guilt didn't vanish, grief never grants that mercy, but it softened. The sharp edges dulled. She began to smile again, slowly, cautiously. She began to talk about Lisa in the present tense, not just as someone she'd lost, but as someone who still guided her. She even started writing again, something she hadn't done in years. Pages and pages of memories of letters she'd never sent. Not for the public, not for a book, just for Lisa. In one entry, she wrote, "You always wanted me to tell the truth, so here it is. I wasn't strong all the time. I wasn't wise. I made choices that hurt you, thinking they'd protect you. But I loved you with everything I had. Every silence, every wrong word, every moment I didn't say enough, it all came from love." And then she wrote one final line, one that mirrored the note Lisa had left behind. "I understand now." For a long time, Priscilla thought forgiveness was something given. But Lisa had shown her that sometimes forgiveness is inherited, passed down quietly from one generation to the next, through gestures, through words left unfinished on a piece of paper. The note had started as a secret, but it became something sacred, proof that love doesn't end, it only changes form. And though Priscilla would never show it to the world, she knew it had already done what it was meant to do. It had healed something inside her that she didn't know could still be healed. Yet just as the pain began to ease, something unexpected arrived, a message from Lisa's lawyer. A sealed envelope addressed to Priscilla, discovered among Lisa's private documents. Inside was a second note, shorter, sharper. It read, "If Mom ever finds the first letter, tell her there's more she needs to see." And suddenly, the quiet peace Priscilla had found began to tremble again. Because now, she wasn't sure if forgiveness was the ending, or just the beginning of another truth waiting to be uncovered. For weeks, Priscilla kept that second envelope sealed. She'd set it on her nightstand beside Lisa's framed photo, promising herself she'd open it when she was ready. But grief doesn't wait for readiness. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, and one night, it came hard enough to make her reach for the letter. The paper inside was simple, folded once. No greeting, no signature, just a few lines in Lisa's handwriting, clear, careful, and unbearably calm. "If Mom ever finds this, tell her the first letter wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning. There's more I want her to know about Dad, about me, about the truth we all hid from each other. I understand now why she stayed silent. I would have done the same." That last line hit harder than anything else. I would have done the same. For decades, people had judged Priscilla, the woman who left Elvis, the woman who built his empire, the woman who never spoke about the darkest years. But Lisa, in death, had given her something the world never had, understanding. It was enough to make her breathe again. And for the first time since the funeral, Priscilla began to feel something that almost resembled peace. Weeks later, she agreed to one more interview, not with a talk show, not for promotion, but for something quieter. A small sit-down conversation with a journalist who'd covered the Presley family for years. When the cameras began rolling, she wasn't in makeup or designer clothes. She wore what she always wore at home, simple, neutral, understated. The interviewer began gently. "Priscilla, people still talk about Lisa's final days. They wonder what she said to you that night before she passed. Would you be willing to share that?" For a long time, Priscilla didn't answer. The silence stretched heavy but not empty. Then finally, she nodded. "She called me," she began softly. "Just a few hours before she—" Her voice faltered before she was gone. She said her stomach hurt. She said she didn't feel good. And then she said she was going home. Her eyes lowered, the words trembling. "I didn't know that's what she meant. I thought she was just tired. I told her to rest, to call me later." She paused, and she never did. There was another silence, the kind that television doesn't know how to hold, but life does. Then the interviewer asked, "When you say going home, do you think she meant something more?" Priscilla looked up, and for the first time she didn't hold back. "I do," she said. "I think she meant home in the truest sense with her father. I think she felt him that night. Maybe she always did." The words hung in the air, fragile and devastating. "I used to think death took things from us," Priscilla continued. "But with Lisa, I realized it also returns them. She and her father are together now, the two people I loved most in this world. Maybe that's why she sounded so calm." Her voice cracked. She wasn't afraid. After that interview aired, millions of people watched. Not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. It wasn't a spectacle, it was a confession wrapped in grace. Clips went viral the moment Priscilla said, "She wasn't afraid." Fans from around the world sent letters, thanking her for speaking the words every grieving parent wishes they could. But what the world didn't know, what Priscilla didn't reveal on camera, was what came after. Because later that same night, after the cameras left and the house was quiet again, she sat alone and opened her journal. Inside, she slipped Lisa's 2 notes, the first with its forgiveness and the second with its understanding. Then she began writing something new. She titled it, "The Truth About My Daughter." In it, she wrote everything she had never dared to say aloud. She wrote about how Lisa had always carried Elvis in her veins, his music, his melancholy, his fire. How she'd spent her whole life trying to balance between honoring his legacy and escaping it. How she'd loved fiercely, lived recklessly, and forgave slowly. She wrote about their arguments, about how Lisa once told her, "You can't keep pretending grief is dignity," and how that line had haunted her ever since. And she wrote about the one thing she'd never admitted publicly, that sometimes she had been afraid of her daughter's pain, because she saw too much of Elvis in it, the same restlessness, the same storms behind the smile. She had tried to save Lisa by being calm, by being strong, by holding everything together. But now she realized that maybe what Lisa needed wasn't strength, it was honesty. By the time she finished writing, the sun was rising outside. The first light touched the photo of Elvis and Lisa that sat on her desk, father and daughter frozen in time, both gone, both loved beyond words. She whispered to them both, "I'm ready to tell the truth now." And she did. Weeks later, at a public remembrance event in Memphis, Priscilla took the stage. It wasn't planned. She hadn't told anyone she was going to speak. The crowd went silent as she stepped to the microphone. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," she began, "but I think Lisa would want me to." She looked out at the crowd, fans, friends, strangers, and smiled sadly. "People have always asked me what her last words were. They weren't dramatic. They weren't a goodbye. She just said, 'Mom, I don't feel good. I think I'm going to go home.'" A few soft murmurs rippled through the audience, and she continued. "For a long time, I blamed myself for letting her go. I thought maybe if I had kept her longer, if I had asked one more question, she'd still be here." She paused, then shook her head. "But I think I understand now. She wasn't leaving me. She was going home to the place where her pain couldn't follow." Her eyes glistened as she added, "And she left me something before she went, a reminder that forgiveness is stronger than grief. That understanding is stronger than silence." She didn't read the notes. She didn't need to. The truth was already there in her voice, in her stillness, in the way she spoke about Lisa not as someone lost, but as someone found. "Lisa taught me that love doesn't end when someone dies," she said softly. "It just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes a letter, sometimes a song, sometimes it's a quiet voice that says, 'I forgive you, Mom.'" The audience stood in silence. No applause, just reverence, the kind reserved for moments that feel sacred. Later that night, when Priscilla went home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. Not happiness, not relief, just a soft release, like grief finally exhaling. She sat by the window, holding Lisa's notes one last time, then placed them in a small wooden box beside the photograph of Elvis and Lisa together. "Keep her close," she whispered to him, "and tell her I understand." In that moment, the years of silence, the misunderstandings, the guilt, they all seemed to dissolve. Because love, real love, outlives every mistake. Priscilla had spent a lifetime being the keeper of Elvis's story. Now she realized she was also the keeper of Lisa's, not as a legacy, not as a tragedy, but as a reminder that even in the deepest heartbreak, there can be peace. The next morning, she gave the only interview she ever would about the note. She didn't show it. She didn't need to. She just said, "Lisa forgave me before she left, and I forgave myself after she did." The reporter asked her, "Do you think she's at peace now?" Priscilla smiled faintly. "I think she was at peace the moment she said she was going home." The room went quiet. "Maybe," she added softly, "she was already there." That was the last public word Priscilla ever spoke about her daughter. But those who were close to her said that after that moment she changed. She smiled more often. She spoke of Lisa in the present tense. She even began visiting Graceland more, sitting quietly in the garden where Elvis rested, as if talking to both of them at once. Some nights she'd bring flowers, one for him, one for Lisa, and sit until the sky turned violet. And if you stood close enough, you might have heard her whisper, "You're together now," and I'm not afraid anymore. That was her peace. Not closure, not forgetting, but understanding, the same kind her daughter had written about. Because sometimes the most powerful goodbyes aren't spoken through tears or headlines. They're whispered in forgiveness. And for Priscilla Presley, forgiveness wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of hers. Do you believe Lisa's final words brought Priscilla peace? Or did they leave her with questions she'll never escape? Tell me in the comments below. Because sometimes what we call an ending is really just love finding its way home again, in silence, in memory, in forgiveness.